guys, welcome to another episode of The Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick.
I'm Ian.
Today, well, I guess I should backtrack a little bit. Last week, we talked about surprisingly good albums. So this week, we're talking about surprisingly bad albums.
Boo.
There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you go check them out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that we put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you go check all that out. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us the old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time we release new episodes. So like I said in the intro, last week we talked about surprisingly good albums. So albums that we didn't have a lot of expectations for, and we went into it and loved it. So this week we're talking about the complete opposite. Albums where we had expectations for, and they turned out to be hot garbage.
Yeah.
For the most part. But especially the first one I got is, I guess the first one is, I mean, obviously I wasn't a fan of the band when the album came out. I didn't listen to it until much later, but I knew this band's 70s work and loved all their albums. And then I listened to this one because I loved one song off of it, and the rest of it is absolute garbage. But that album is Hot Space by Queen. Of course, Under Pressure is the great track that's on this. It's the only saving grace on this album. And then the rest of it, I think the rest of it is forgettable. I mean, at best, the other songs are okay. At worst, like I said, some of those tracks on here are just unlistenable. And when you compare this to like News of the World or Jazz or some of the other great albums by Queen, I mean, this just does not compare.
Right. I've never even listened to it.
Yeah, you don't need to.
So for me, I'm a huge Green Day fan.
So speaking of hot garbage.
Indeed. I'm a huge Green Day fan. And I would even go as far as to say that up until this album, I didn't think they'd ever made a bad album. They had albums that were, better or not so good, but never a bad album. Like, There's albums I like more than others. But this one?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on this album. Father of All is just a horrible album. But I'm not a big fan of the trilogy either that came out before that.
Oh, I love the trilogy. Don't get me wrong. There are...
I like Uno. I don't like Dos or Tre.
Yeah, and I felt the same way too, but then I really went deeper on those two albums, and actually they're really good. But there's parts, I mean, you could maybe make that a double album and it'd be all right. But anyway, this album is trash. There's not a good song on it at all.
I'm trying to think of a single track.
I've tried listening to it at least a dozen times, just thinking, okay, maybe I'm just not getting it. But apparently I'm getting it because it's just terrible. It's almost like it's not even the same band.
It sounds like an album that they just rushed through just to be done with it.
And there's elements of them trying different things, but it's so disjointed from anything they've ever done before.
Yeah.
Like I said, every song he's got this effect on his. Billy Joe has an effect on his voice. It sounds like a different band. It sounds like a slightly emo band from the 20s.
It sounds like one of those weird side projects that that Green Day has been.
I like their side projects too. I would say that. Well, I like most of their side projects, but this is just hot garbage. Is me being polite.
It does not sound like Green Day.
No, and I can't find any redeeming qualities in this album.
Yeah.
And I'm going forward, I think their next album at least will be slightly return to form, which is fine. I don't want them to sound exact. I don't want them to redo Dookie all over and over again.
And they haven't.
But I also don't want them to be a completely different band either.
Yeah. So I'll be a little less harsh on my next pick.
I will not be on my next.
Well, you won't be very nice to this pick either. But
okay.
Do you even know what it is?
Not yet.
All right. So I've been for a long time. I've been a big Kanye West fan. Kanye has done and said a bunch of stupid things, and he does, he's just crazy, and he's gotten crazier progressively throughout his career. But I love a lot of his music. And then he released Ye, and it's very different. I guess it's not really all that different from some of the other stuff that he's done around before and after, but the stuff he tried to do on this album just does not work. I bought it just because how much I love a lot of his albums, and there is some redeeming songs on this album, but largely it's not as unlistenable as a couple of the other albums that we talked about already, and some of the stuff we will talk about, but it's pretty close.
So this one is it's the band's follow-up album to their debut album. I love their debut album. It's a great album. Every song on it is good. Some are even great. So when this album came out, I was expecting at least the same, if not better. Because a lot of bands, you know, especially when they have a really good debut album, their second album's usually at least as good as their first. Three Doors Down, Away from the Sun, nothing. There is not a song on here I like.
See, I'm the opposite because
Yeah.
I
know you
actually
like this
enjoy
album.
this. I mean, I don't think it's anywhere close to as good as their first album.
Right.
I think it's still a good album for what they did.
I went and bought this on CD the day it came out. 'Cause
I know
like
you
said-
hated it right away.
Well, I tried. I listened to it several times. Nothing was working for me. Nothing was grabbing me. Yeah. And even as time's gone on, I've even gotten harsher about it because I've tried going back and re-listening to it. It's not good.
I think what the problem is with this album is they took a lot of the like radio friendly hits that they had on their first album and tried to recreate an entire album out of that.
Right.
And some parts I think it really does work. I think there's some really good tracks on this album. I know you don't. And I think it didn't quite work on some other songs.
I would say the songs on this that work are just songs from the first album and they're done better on the first album.
Maybe.
That's how I look at it. So it's just not an album, and because of this, I've never gone back and listened to any of their other stuff after this.
Yeah.
Because I figure, you know, if you can't follow up your debut with at least a similar quality, nothing that comes after that's going to be anywhere near as good. But maybe I'm wrong. But this album, I can't do it. It's not a good album to me.
For me, the next album is kind of like Away from the Sun, where I feel like they took some really poppy moments from the previous albums and tried to make an entire album out of it, and it just didn't work. But I think Away from the Sun works a lot better than this one. But it's 9 Lives by Aerosmith. I grew up a big Aerosmith fan. Of course, I love all their 70s stuff. I love Permanent Vacation. I love Pump. After Pump, they kind of lost me a little bit. And even though there's a couple of good tracks on here, there's a lot of it where if I'm listening to it digitally, I skip right over them. I would say at least half to 3/4 of this album.
I think I've only actually listened to it one time, and that would have been when it first came out, maybe. I never owned it, so maybe it couldn't have been when it came out, because I would have had to have listened to it on CD.
It was like, what, 97, I think, 98 when this came out?
Yeah, that sounds about right, because I think Get a Life came out like 93.
Yeah.
I had not Get a Life on CD. I like that album, but I definitely, I don't remember any songs on this, but if it's basically taking the radio-friendly hits off of that and making a full album out of it, then I can definitely understand what you're saying, because those are the tracks I would skip over on Get a Life. I like the in-between songs.
Yeah. What I would say is, like, if this album was done by a different band, I would feel differently about this album. But because it was Aerosmith, it was such a departure, I think, from a lot of their earlier stuff, even in the same decade. You know, I think it was just an album that to this day, even though I own it, I'm just not a big fan of.
Maybe I should correct. Is it Get a Life or Get a Grip?
It's Get a Grip.
Get a Grip. I apologize.
Oh, okay.
So correction in there.
I knew it didn't sound right when you said it.
Yeah, it didn't sound right to me either. Then I started thinking about it when you're talking.
It's
okay.
Get a Grip.
It's Get a Grip. So my next one, I'm a big fan of the band Yes, but obviously, yes.
It's my poor joke.
Yeah, that's fine. We're used to it.
Yeah.
It's pretty much Yes of the 70s that I like. There's a few things in the 80s that are really, really good, but overall, it's their 70s stuff that most people like, and myself included. So when we're going to release a new album this year, I was kind of excited. I was like, let's see how what they're going to do with it. And all the hype was that this was kind of a return to form. Mirror to the Sky is not a good album.
No.
And it made me go back and re-listen to a couple of their more recent albums. They're not that great either. So maybe it's just this current incarnation of Yes, because I think there's only one original member left from the 70s. The rest have come and gone throughout the years. Whatever their direction is, it's not working for me. The album sold quite well. People have liked it. I don't find anything good on it.
Yeah.
So, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is.
So I grew up a pretty big Metallica fan. I wasn't like the hugest Metallica fan, but I definitely love their albums, at least from like Master of Puppets through even Load and Reload. I really enjoyed the albums. Even though I know a lot of people out there really
at least Load.
Yeah, and I think Reload was not as good as Load, but still an okay album. And then they released Saint Anger, and this is the album where I definitely lost my interest in Metallica. And I think this album was, it wasn't a huge departure from the band. It was definitely a departure from what they did on Load and Reload. And I think there was such a big backlash on those two albums that they tried to make more of like a heavier, thrashier kind of album. And for a large part of this album, I don't think it worked. It sounds like Lars is beating on tin cans in this album.
I agree. It's not my favorite Metallica. I see the merits of it, but it's really because they wanted that's it. They wanted to kind of go back to their thrash roots. But the problem is the way it's recorded and then the engineering techniques they used. It just doesn't sound good, and it really brings the album down because you're right. It basically sounds like it was recorded in a garage.
Yeah.
When you're a band like Metallica, you don't make your album sound that way.
Yeah.
You can make it sound raw, but not like amateurish.
Yeah.
The recording part of it is amateurish. The engineering part, the mastering, all that stuff is amateurish intentionally, and it just makes it a bad album.
In my opinion, it just doesn't work.
I still like the album, but nowhere it's the worst album in my opinion of their catalog.
Yeah.
So I can definitely see that. So my last one, I'm a huge Blues Traveler fan. And even some of their lesser albums that came later on after one of their members died, I think it was their guitar player died, are they're weaker installments in the Blues Traveler catalog, but they're not bad albums. They've got a lot of great songs on them. But then comes along this album called Blow Up the Moon. I don't know what they were doing with that. It's almost kind of like a jam album because they got a bunch of guest people coming on, but none of the songs are good. And they have good musicians with them, but just none of the songs are good. And it's just a hard album to listen to. I don't listen to it.
I think I've only listened to it maybe once or twice, but I know what you're talking about. Like the way the songs are constructed just doesn't work for Blues Traveler.
No, and I mean, they haven't really been able to redeem themselves, in my opinion, either, because the album that came out after is better. It's closer to what a Blues Traveler album is, but then all they've released is cover albums since then. So I don't know. I mean, hopefully it was just a bump in the road and they'll reorient, but Blow Up the Moon is not a good album.
Well, that's all we got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Let us know what you think are your surprisingly bad albums. Albums that you thought were going to be a whole lot better before you listened to them than they actually ended up being. But I think there's definitely a lot more than just the ones we covered today. Let us know what you guys think. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you see a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. And that's all we got. Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Keep on spinning. Peace.